Dr. Alex Weiss. Currently, he is a visiting professor at Kyoto University, and when he's not here, he's a senior lecturer in psychology at the University of Edinburgh. Alex, if you can, could you begin to share your
And
slides?
we'll try to. And there we go. Is that
Yes,
working?
it's working,
Oh,
and we have
subtitles.
subtitles. Can we see it on the? Yes, and we can see it on the YouTube.
Amazing.
All
Yeah,
right.
just
And with his presentation title, "Can being neurotic be a good thing?" All right. Uh, Timer will go as soon as you start talking. Take it away.
okay. Thank you. So let's see what way to start this. Well, I mean, everyone's interested in living longer, living a better life longer. So not just living longer, but living pretty well and being relatively healthy. I recently collaborated with some guy who turned 100 shortly after the publication, the paper was published, and he was pretty sharp, sharper than I was. Pretty amazing guy. But this kind of interest has been going on for a long time. This is, I think, from the 1940s. But if you look on the internet, you'll no doubt find all sorts of tips on how to live how to live longer life. But one thing a lot of these don't really get at are these kind of individual differences. So this is a nice way to illustrate this. So if I can just direct people's attention. So you've got this fellow here. See, that fellow here. That's Jess Oppenheimer. This guy here is Ginger Baker. You may or may not have heard of some of these. Jimi Hendrix, most people. That's Edward Dmytryk. And the center guy is Harry Patch. So what's remarkable about them, if you're trying to figure out, like, what kinds of factors cause people to live longer, live shorter lives, well, Jimi Hendrix and Jimmy Baker are both rock stars at about the same era, that is the 1960s. But as you can see, there's just a whopping difference in how long they lived. And that's despite the fact that, I mean, in addition to the very sort of everyday drugs they were doing in the 1960s, I think Ginger Baker had many, many encounters with the harder stuff, heroin and whatnot. And he just died a few years ago, and he was also a pretty unpleasant individual. And then you've got two other stars, and both the upper left and lower right corner. On the upper left, Oppenheimer versus Dmytryk, both in Hollywood. Jess Oppenheimer, known for I Love Lucy, and Edward Dmytryk for movies like the Caine Mutiny and all kinds of film noir. And still kind of a pretty good difference in life expectancy, despite the fact that Edward Dmytryk was born a lot earlier. But both of them were certifiable geniuses. They were so-called termites. And if you want to ask me later what a termite is, I'll tell you. And Harry Patch in the middle lived for 111 years in Syria.
Alex,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. You're coming in a little bit soft. Could you
Uh,
speak up a little bit more, please?
okay. So I'm sorry. So you got Harry Patch in the middle, who's well over 100 years old when he died. He was the last remaining British World War One veteran. So despite not having all the privileges of fame and this kind of thing, and facing being in the trenches and facing machine gun fire and that sort of thing, he still lived to a pretty healthy old age by anyone's definition. So what's possibly causing these differences? There's good evidence that personality is related to health, and typically there are five. Typically, people think of personality in terms of five big dimensions, and you can think of it as ocean, that is openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And I've sort of created a font in about the size of the effects of these things. So openness, extroversion, kind of smallish effects. Socioeconomic status, as a comparison, very small effects. IQ and neuroticism about the same size. And conscientiousness and agreeableness, really big effects. But neuroticism is a bit odd because the effects aren't quite always what people think. And neuroticism is not just sort of this general anxiety that people are feeling over the whole COVID situation, but just sort of a general state that they're in. It's more of a trait than a state. So here's some kind of ways to figure out if you might be high in neuroticism. You often feel bad or sad. You don't cope easily with stress. You're anxious. You make mountains out of molehills, and even a small single bad event can spoil your day. You encounter the same problems over and over and over again. And we know that because neuroticism is somewhat heritable, that your parents, your siblings, your identical twin, or other relatives are high in neuroticism, that probably suggests that you probably have a better than zero chance of being higher in neuroticism yourself. So neuroticism, some people think of this as like a either or thing, but it's more of a continuum. So you can be, anywhere from Hayase Nisa on the left, who's very low in neuroticism, at least that seems to be my impression from Macross, to Lin Men Mei on the right, who wanted to throw herself and Hikaru Ichijo out of an airlock because she was just so upset. But maybe that's just true love for you. I don't know. And most people are somewhere in the, kind of have an average neuroticism. So the distribution is a nice bell curve. Neuroticism is pretty much invariably related to poor mental health. Lots of like the affective disorders like depression, a lot of the personality disorders like borderline personality disorder have pretty close links to neuroticism. So do phobias, obsessive compulsive disorder, and so on. So, kind of nicely demonstrated in the series Welcome to the NHK about a hikikomori. I probably pronounced that incorrectly, but that's life. And there's a general finding that neuroticism is related to poor health, poor physical health, I should say. But it's, oh geez, I really goofed that one. It's just related to physical health, but it's not always in the way we expect. So it's a general expectation, and a lot of papers find this, is that neuroticism is related to poor health. But there's some studies, including one of mine that was cited in this 2007 review, that are actually showing neuroticism is related to higher neuroticism is related to better health. And so this is just a quote from that paper saying, well, neuroticism generally seems to be bad for you, but there's some studies, too, in this case, that reported a protective effect. And another thing that might indicate that you're high in neuroticism is that you go to the doctor because of bodily experiences and sensations. So you feel a little twinge one day. You maybe something just kind of changes in your sort of daily rhythm, or you're going to the bathroom at some odd hour that you normally don't go to the bathroom in, or you go to the bathroom more and you think something's wrong. You might be worried, whereas people low in neuroticism don't get worried about these things. And these people go to the doctors and mostly it's nothing, but maybe sometimes it is something. So kind of this going to the bathroom thing that kind of ties into a symptom of type 2 diabetes. And a former PhD student of mine, Eva Chukic, and I looked at this. And here we have just kind of a roundabout picture of what we found. So you have on the left the blue thing is kind of like type 2 diabetes, and you see some overlap, which indicates a relationship. So type 2 diabetes is related to depression, right? So people who are depressed, so these pluses here, people who are depressed are at greater risk of type 2 diabetes and all kinds of other bad things. Like major depression is not a good thing. And of course, neuroticism and depression share overlap as well. But you'll notice here where this arrow is pointing, this little area here, this green area, is, you can think of this is like the part of neuroticism that's not related to depression. And maybe that's kind of a part of neuroticism that's a good thing. And we found that when you kind of take away that depression part of neuroticism, diabetes is actually more related to low neuroticism rather than high neuroticism. Okay? And these aren't huge effects. It's not like, you're high neuroticism, you'll get diabetes. It's just a greater risk. Some studies, including the one that was mentioned in the 2007 review, found that neuroticism is related to longer life. There's one Australian study by Corton et al. These are community-dwelling adults, all pretty old. A study of me by myself and others on 1,076 community dwelling adults, and all the ones in this study, by the way, the Weiss et al. Study, these were all people who were pretty low in terms of socioeconomic status. Most of them had some serious medical conditions, and still neuroticism in these individuals was related to living longer. And then there's another study I did on Vietnam-era veterans who are between the ages of 31 and 48, also showing some effect that an association between higher neuroticism and lower mortality. So along comes this paper in 2009, kind of why are some of these studies finding neuroticism is good for you while other studies show it's bad for you? And this paper kind of called this modeling both the direct and indirect relationships. So neuroticism can have like an association via, say, psychological distress or alcohol use or smoking, or this somatic health variable here, which is made up of self-rated health, chronic illness, and forced vital capacity, which is like how much air can you expel through your lungs in 1 second? And someone tells you, well, slow. And what this study found was that all these pathways, these indirect pathways that are highlighted in red, like this one here through psychological distress, or this one through somatic health, all of these pathways are related to increased risk. So neuroticism has, is related to increased risk of mortality because it's related to psychological distress, which probably includes things like depression. But this direct effect, just kind of neuroticism by itself, not via smoking, not somatic health, that's actually related to reduced risk. Okay. So we thought, we looked through these studies, and all of them had this kind of self-rated health variable in common. That was kind of the thing that set apart the studies that found neuroticism was protective, and the studies that found that neuroticism was not protective, that neuroticism was bad for you. And this is these kinds of popular questions to ask because it's actually pretty strongly related to length of life. And that's just, in general, how would you rate your overall health? Single question gives you a good indication of how long, what your risk of dying is over the next couple of years. And this study was using used UK Biobank, which is something like over 300,000 participants, so lots and lots and lots of power to detect effects. And what we found is that when we accounted for the self-rated health variable, neuroticism was related to lower mortality. When we didn't, so we just looked at neuroticism but didn't include self-rated health, neuroticism was related to greater risk. So, that's pretty interesting, right? That's kind of suggesting that variable is kind of the key as to why something about the aspect of neuroticism captured by self-rated health is bad, and what's left over, if you will, is good stuff. So we want to look at what that part of neuroticism was. And I'm not going to go into factor analysis. And I was thinking, is there a way I could communicate, what factor analysis and bifactor rotation is, and, within 2 minutes to a general audience or even a specialized audience? The answer is absolutely not. But factor analysis is just generally a way that we can sort of find out what items, say, in a scale, or what behaviors are going together more than the other ones. And we found evidence for two of these facets in this neuroticism scale used in Biobank. One was anxious/tense, that we labeled it. These people, they call themselves nervous people. They think of themselves as tense or highly strung, and they suffer from nerves. The scale was developed in the 1960s or something, so forgive the slightly anachronistic language. There's an even older scale that's has even better kind of anachronistic language in it. And then there's worried vulnerable, and that's, are your feelings hurt? Are you a worrier? Do you worry too long after an embarrassing experience, like, I don't know, screwing up the share screen thing when you're supposed to give a talk? And are you often troubled by guilt? And that's that's actually, kind of, we found that that was protective against all kinds, sort of various different kinds of mortality, except for death from external causes. So when you're talking about cancer death, respiratory disease death, cardiovascular death, and all-cause mortality, it's protective. Absolutely no effect on, like, whether you're going to be, I don't know, murdered or die in an accident, so-called external causes. And sort of what you think about as neuroticism is this area of overlap, where these two sorts of different facets or aspects of neuroticism share a variation in common. Okay? And we also looked at genetic correlations in a later study. So you can kind of like assess, and biobank is good for this because lots and lots of participants are make it possible to detect these teeny tiny genetic effects, really, really small. So you got lots of participants, and so we found evidence for some genes related to anxious tense, and some genes related to worried vulnerable, and some genes related to this general neuroticism factor. And then we can ask, are the genes for, say, each of these different bits of neuroticism and the general factor, do they overlap? Are they shared with, are they the same genes that are related to various health outcomes? Okay? And what you can see, so anything in green is saying that this is like related to, like, this is a positive association. Okay? So, longevity, in green means that worried vulnerable is related to living longer, or parents' age of death. And anything red is a negative effect. And depending on how dark it is, that's kind of a stronger effect. And if you just look through this, you can see in most cases, the worried vulnerable and the anxious tension bits of neuroticism are kind of, here we have them in green, green, but general neuroticism has like an opposite effect. It's in red, in the opposite direction. And here you see the worried and vulnerability and anxious tense are related to kind of better cardiovascular health, the exception being blood pressure, which is also related to being anxious and tense, not surprisingly. But the direction of the effect...
Alex, it's a little bit hard to see your cursor. Could you circle it, please?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. So if you look here, this is cardiovascular disease, okay? And you see here, for worried vulnerable, it's all related, worried vulnerable is related to lower levels of coronary artery disease, lower diastolic blood pressure, lower systolic blood pressure. But look at this. So anxious tense, it's also related to lower coronary artery disease, but people who are still in this thing that suggests that they're anxious and tense, those people, the genes for that anxious and tense thing are shared with actual blood pressure, higher blood pressure. And you can just see again, here are these kind of different effects. These bits of neuroticism related to better cognitive functioning or better SES, better longevity results, whereas that general factor, that overlapping bit, is related to poor elements. The only place where that really doesn't happen for the most part is mental health, okay? So even if you have the, kind of good bits of neuroticism for physical health, it's still, like, not very good for your mental health. And so you kind of just go through this, but you can see that there's these opposite effects. So some aspects of neuroticism are good for you, being worried and vulnerable, and that general factor is not necessarily good for you. Okay, so I'm just going to jump to conclusions, and I don't like very wordy slides, so you'll forgive me for just blabbing on. The conclusions are that, it's probably, if you want to think of a mechanism that, this is just, this is just kind of, our pondering what this means, right? We haven't tested whether this is the case directly, but this is just, kind of one possible way that what might be going on is people who are worried and vulnerable may just go to the doctor a lot and catch things, okay? And like here in Japan, I noticed, because I go to the doctor and things, they test you for everything all the time, and people are tested very, very regularly, and that probably, well, it probably causes some like false positives, but it may catch things like cancer or heart disease in the early stages. And the other really interesting thing is kind of for sort of an evolutionary explanation, like why is there variation in neuroticism? Why aren't we all just like at the optimal level of neuroticism? Say if the optimal level of neuroticism was a 3 on a 7-point scale, why aren't we all like that, right? Because you'd expect, like, people who have suboptimal neuroticism, whether too high or too low, would get left out of the gene pool. Well, if neuroticism has these multiple effects, some good and some bad, bad on mental health and good in some ways in physical health and bad in some ways in physical health, that might explain how that, people are still able, there's still variation in the population. And as with all things, I've got kind of acknowledgments here, and thanks a lot to Ray for setting this up. But just thanking my hosts at the WRC, including Miho Murayama, thanking Katsuro Matsuzawa and Tomoko Kurihara, who the latter of whom has helped with getting set up living in Japan and exiting Japan, and some colleagues of mine like Paul Costa and Ian Deary, David Hill and Eva Chukic, who helped with these studies or were part of these studies, and funding from that Ian got for a lot of the UK Biobank studies. And I think that's my slides. So I think there's time for questions, or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
That was just 20 minutes. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Alex, for the great and informative talk. Now we have room for questions. So if you're on the YouTube, please write down in the chat, or if you're joining us on Zoom, go ahead, either write in the chat, or you can use the hand up signal, and we can unmute you and pick. So while we're waiting for the question to come up, I actually have one on this. So you're working at the WRC, the Wildlife Research Center at Kyoto University. It doesn't seem like, Kyoto University doesn't have a psych department per se. But so what is your work now at WRC then? Working with animals themselves?
Yeah, well, not my main, but I've got two sets of research interests. In general, personality psychology. Oh dear.
Sorry, could you turn your video back on?
How did I turn it off in the first place?
Sorry, I accidentally turned it off. I wanted to change the slide sharing.
Start my video. Hold on.
Okay, you're back.
I'll just kill my share. There we
go. Thank you.
So I study personality, but I study it in humans and I study it in animals. I started studying personality in animals before I started studying it in humans. The fun thing being, I've never taken a course in personality in my life for whatever reason. Because before I started in personality, I wanted nothing to do with the study of personality. It's a long, boring story, but it's just, kind of my, I was mainly interested in animal learning, and I just wound up falling into the personality thing. And, it was pretty good stuff. And, I find all kinds of, looking for, you could say, connections or ways that, say, chimpanzees are similar to humans in their personality or vice versa. And that's been my bread and butter now for longer than I'd like to remember. Since 2000, I guess my first talk on that was like 1998 on the chimpanzees. So yeah, long time, 22 years. You're muted.
Sorry about that. That's a long time studying personality. So, well then we were talking about neuroticism. Then do you see the signs of neuroticism in the animal kingdom? Are there certain animal species that are more appear to be more like that, or does it depend?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's hard. It's always hard to compare species and how high or low a species is on something, right? Like make a direct comparison. But within species, you see within a lot of species, you can see something like orangutans. There's just as much variation in neuroticism as there is in humans. In chimpanzees, you see something like that. Not as clearly defined, but yeah, there's still something. What other species can I think? So yeah, various, lots and lots of animals have something kind of similar to that, where you can measure them on that. And it's just a normally distributed trait, right? So if you measure it, if you get like a sample of animals, sample of people, and you get them all to fill out a questionnaire, or you get people to rate the animals or make some behavioral observations, you get a nice bell curve, every time. With just about any kind of biological or psychological trait, if you get a big sample of people, you get a bell curve. That's just the wonders of quantitative genetics in action. Just basically the roll of the dice. So.
Then is that more in line with like social animals that like animals that live in groups, or does that change then if they have if in more solitary animals?
Not that I've found. I guess there may be difference in how they express it, but orangutans are very, very solitary animals, and they seem, their neuroticism factor is as clear as day. When I saw it, it's like, yep, that's neuroticism. No question about it.
Oh, I'd love to see a neurotic orangutan, or just ones that show that kind of trait.
Yeah, yeah. Well, orangutans are, I guess they're a bit, because they're not like really. Seeing a neurotic chimpanzee is a lot easier, because orangutans are pretty quiet, and they don't really move. With chimpanzees, there's just a lot more sort of melodrama in their life. A really good book, and it's not really about personality, but it's just a great book about chimpanzees in general. Is called Chimpanzee Politics by Franz de Waal. Anything by Jane Goodall on her early stuff about Gombe is great too, but Chimpanzee Politics is just, you read it and you think you're like, that you're like, just thinking about a bunch of humans interacting with each other. So, yeah.
Oh, there it is. Chimpanzee Politics by Franz de Waal.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. I'll put that in the chat in
Okay.
case anybody wants to take a look at it.
Yeah.
Questions from the audience, or from Katie? Honestly, I could just keep asking questions from this.
Yeah, there's nothing on the YouTube right now, but I was wondering about the studies that you mentioned. So like, how did you collect this data from people?
Oh, well, like a biobank and all these, it's just somebody goes out. These are most of these studies are essentially existing databases. So UK Biobank, people just pay X amount of money to access UK Biobank. There's some like the Vietnam veterans that's like just freely available.
Oh, okay.
And there's other, like, if you ever want to like kind of do like amateur, like learn statistics and do like amateur data analysis, there's so much data out there that you can analyze. You just go to like, I think it's ICPSR, and you can like just kind of like search for any kind of like trait or like, health type thing, and they'll, throw up like a zillion, not a zillion, but just a bunch of like data sets that you could just download for free and just start analyzing.
Wow, so it's just already there. You don't have to do any of the data collection work.
No. And the thing is, it's really good to use these data sets, right? Because like grant money paid for them, and they've collected more data than you could probably ever collect on your own. So.
Oh, interesting. Thank you.
You said there was a question from the chat, or?
Not right now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything here. How about our participants in Zoom?
I have a question, if you don't mind.
John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, So I saw you definitely had some NHK there. Welcome to the NHK there at the start of your presentation. I was wondering, I guess just anthropologically, like I just see a lot more of entertainment and a lot more kind of analysis of these things from like Japanese entertainment and anime especially. I was wondering if there was any like if there's anything in your, I mean, I just think it's so interesting that this like really write about, like really actually make shows about that. Like you see it in the US with I don't want to say like butterfly effect, but like there's definitely like a few that I'm not thinking the name of right now. They're really good analysis of this, but I don't see it as commonly checked or commonly portrayed as I do in Japan, specifically like in subculture of anime and things. So I was wondering if there was any reason for that, if you saw like different analysis through different countries, different cultures, that kind of thing.
Oh gosh, I really don't know. It's a long question. You can always drop me an email and chat about it that way, but chat about Linux as well. I really don't know. I guess it's not my field. I mean, it just, there may be taboos with different countries and discussing certain things, but I couldn't say. I really couldn't say. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. I just wanted to know if there was like any like, oh, is you know, that one province in Western, like, you know, somewhere like actually there's like a lot of neuroticism over there.
Well, some people have done that with like the UK and the United States.
That makes sense to me.
So, but you know, I don't think anyone's done it with Japan, but that'd be kind of a neat study as well.
Yeah, I would like to see the first world countries kind of compared on that, especially this year.
Yeah.
I have one more question if we have time. Is it okay, Raymond?
If we don't, time's up. Honestly, yeah, we got enough for one or two more questions, and since the floor is open, nobody's commenting, so like honestly, like have at it.
So I've been reading a book called Sex at Dawn recently, which is about bonobo relationships basically, and it's kind of comparing how I don't know anything about this at all. I'm just interested person that's reading books, like comparing how chimpanzees and bonobos relate to human evolution. And the authors of this book basically say that like you can draw some big comparisons, and in some ways maybe looking at bonobos is more accurate, or like there's some parts that we're missing if we just look at chimpanzees for like a human connections with human nature. Have you heard about this?
I think that what I know of bonobos and things is that bonobos and chimpanzees is kind of like, you can think of them both about equally distant from humans. They're both kind of like similar to humans in slightly different ways and different from humans. Yeah. So, dear, I think I have a child crying in the background. It might be a good time for me to leave because my kid is crying. So.
Oh no.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alex.
Okay, yeah, that's of it. So, thanks. Yes, take care of that.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.